Aloha. Mm,
Mm. Good to see you. Mm. Mm.
nice to have folks here. Hopefully, some people are getting a long weekend.
Ah, right. Took me a minute to
Yeah,
get that.
a
Yeah.
holiday, no one.
Yeah. Huh. Mm. You might greet the other beings on the other pages if you want to. Mm. We hope you are well, doing good enough. Mm. And so letting your attention just settle around the surface of your body, the space around your body. You might just let the attention go where it's called right now, in between hearing, hands, body, just anchoring somewhere that feels like where you're naturally right now inclined, a more open awareness of being with hearing, or a more focused awareness with your hands, or called anywhere in your body. You don't always have to make your mind up within a few seconds. You just give it time. And you might just get in touch with that we tend to want to pay attention because we care. Letting yourself receive that, finding that care for where your attention is naturally drawn. And the emphasis right now will be on the shifting out of so much conceptual overlay to again taking the time, whether it's the sound of wind or silence, physical sensations in our body, hands. That thoughts about these experiences will happen. And it's a gentle shifting into the direct experience just as it's happening. The textures, vibrations, as they're changing. And often when you look carefully, you'll see that we will tend to get a visual image of our body, a memory, even a memory of texture, vibration, or of what might be causing the sound in our mind, a thought about that. You just let those thoughts come and go and just see if you can be with the non-visual images again as the sensations, textures, vibrations appear and disappear. And as you do that at times, you see if you can receive that texture, vibration, the immediacy of those moment to moment textures and vibrations. Non-visually. Sometimes there's a great relief in that. It's more of a letting the experiences be just as they are without the additional memories of how we remember them conceptually. And then if just for a while, just you can put your hand, one of your hands on your abdomen, belly, or not. Just seeing if you can allow and make space for this movement of air, element, breath. And just notice the gradual shift into the non-visual experience. And take your time, just take your time to let whatever appears in that area of our body, just let it be just as it is. No need to add anything into it or take anything out of it. Get rid of any way it's appearing and disappearing. Notice if you can make more space for the flow of this movement, the flow of moment to moment change here, the rising, falling, without the visual image. Or to receive the sensations just as they are and let them unfold, disappear just as they are. Out of great care. And then we see if we can learn to do that with whatever appears, with sounds, body sensations, smells, tastes, thoughts, emotions, sight. Out of great care for life, just as it is. Take the time to just let things be just as they are. No need to get or get rid of.
Thank you, Michelle. So we are gonna take some questions today if anyone has any. But before that, I realized we should probably make a little announcement just about the sort of coming weeks and months. Michelle and I will be here again next Sunday for the Sunday sitting. And then she and I are going to sit for our, our own retreat for something like 5 or 6 weeks, depending on kind of what we can work out with the schedule. So during that time, we'll still have the Sunday sitting, but it'll just be a kind of practice leader holding the space so you guys can still sit together, but there won't be any talks or Q&A for some weeks. And so we've actually closed the Sunday sitting to new registration for the time being, because we'll come back for a few weeks, but then we are going to teach out in British Columbia for a few weeks. So there'll be a little bit stops and starts for a couple months before we're back in full swing again in May.
And then the online retreat.
Right, then we're doing an online retreat in
June.
June. Hopefully some more kind of shorter in-person programs in Hawaii for, sometimes this coming year, in New Mexico in August, another online program in November. So anyhow, that's to say if there is a future. That's the plan. We'll see how it all shakes down. So yeah, we have some time. If anyone has any questions about your practice, going on in your practice, things with our instructions, or any ongoing ways we might be able to support you in your meditation practice. So just like Graham has done, you can click on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and raise your hand, and we'll know you have a question. If we you could also just write into the chat saying that you have a question, and we'll call on you. And I don't know if anyone else has seen this AI companion. I'm not going to do this because I don't know what the AI companion is for Zoom. And so far, I think we've been okay without it, but I'm going to look into it. Someone else like last week also like asked to get it going, and I'm going to not do that for now because AI,
I
our
don't
good
even know. I
companion.
don't even know what that is, so
So
I vote no.
our good companion, AI, our forever companion. So yeah, we'll get started. Graham, how are you? Do you have a question there? You can unmute there.
Simply, how about, or could you help me with some labels when the mind watches the mind or the mind watches the breath? Or are there subcategories or functional labels? Because in some sense, maybe the mind can't watch itself, or who knows what happens when it does. But instead of saying, the mind, can we break that down a bit, please?
Yay. Yes, we absolutely can.
You want to start or do you want to
Either
go?
way, Michelle.
Oh, I just have one, then Jesse can go and then I can add, but I don't know where Graham went, but where are you?
When people unraise their hand, they disappear from that spot.
Okay.
So
Well,
he's around. He just,
a kind of standard note for the mind, for chitta itself, the mind door is knowing. So that it's just like sometimes a soft whisper of knowing. There can be mindfulness of knowing. And all that is arising and passing every moment. So it's just like if the mind starts to wander, it's a more refined object of attention, knowing, so that often there's a light whisper in the mind, knowing very softly once in a while. So it's knowing hearing is happening, or knowing thoughts are happening, thinking, or knowing body sensations are happening. So it's a very, very quiet, light whisper in the mind, for if that's what you're referring to. Of course, there's a lot more that could be said. I'll hear what Jesse says and then see, or if Graham, you have any questions about that.
Yeah, I mean, just so if folks are less familiar, we do come from a lineage that often really emphasizes this practice of like mental noting, like a gentle labeling in the mind of what is being experienced directly. And we don't often emphasize that as much. We tend to emphasize more of just like feeling the direct experience, but we have a lot of faith in the method and the practice and the value of it. We just know that there are times where it can feel sort of heavy-handed for us, and we don't want to sort of turn people away from the practice either. But just to sort of fill in a little bit of kind of around Graham's question of just, so this notion of when you're feeling if we are tuning to the sensations in the body, as often we encourage, this noting of like, oh, tingling, pressure, tightness, hardness, softness, warmth, coolness, um, you know, zinging, whatever, this idea of a very simple mental note, right? That you just add to what is being directly experienced. So it's first about feeling it, but then you're just sort of noting it. It's a way to help getting the thinking mind kind of like more firmly connected to our direct experience. And so then the idea is that there are gentle labels that we can add to any part of our sensory experience. And so yes, for the mind, it really is like, you don't want to, it's this dance of like not trying to spend too much time finding the perfect label, but this general sense of like, oh, planning, right? Worrying, wanting, just thinking, imagining, or if it's like future, past, something it's like a simple way of acknowledging and recognizing what type of mental activity is happening. Is it more in the realm of thinking? Is it more in the realm of emotion? Is it more in the realm of knowing, as Michele mentioned, right? These are all flavors of the mind, heart, that are important, and to recognize that they're also distinct and that we can notice them as distinct, and we notice them as impermanent. We notice them as leading, it's an important way that we start to see how one moment leads to the next. So, oh, you notice a pressure in the knee. Oh, pressure, aching, throbbing. And then maybe we notice aversion, right? And that's a mind experience. So that's different than the physical experience, which is just hardness, throbbing, pressure, stabbing, aching, that we recognize the physicality, and then we see, oh, the aversion in the mind, right? And then we see the mind starting to imagine moving, and it's like, oh, wanting, right? Wanting to relieve the pain, right? Wanting something else to be happening. And then we see whatever mental agitation might come up, right? And so we start, and then there's a sense of like, okay, we're going to move the leg. And then you notice the physical experiences of moving, right, that come from the mind's decision to move. And so we start to see this relationship between mind and body through the noting process, right? It's the noting of one moment to the next that helps us see how these things are related, So again, maybe it is just aversion. You notice aversion. Oh, wanting, not wanting, liking, not liking, thinking, planning, fantasizing, imagining. That tends to be sadness, happiness. You notice the mind state, right? The flavor of mind that's apparent. You can notice any of the factors of awakening. Oh, you know that concentration is present. You know that there's interest that's present. And so there definitely is the sense that you can be mindful of the mind, right? Mindfulness of mind is absolutely part of the practice. And that's really like such a relief, because we can so much think that the mind is in the way, right? That we think, oh, this is about concentrating on the breath, or it's concentrating on the body, but that's not true. It's like we start with something more material. It's sometimes a little bit easier, not that it's easy, but easier to feel that. It's very hard to watch the mind. It's happening very quickly. We're so identified with it. But once you see that you can observe that just as much, oh, interest, investigation, you know, vitaka, vichara, aiming, sustaining, moral shame, moral dread, joy, gratitude, all of these things can be known, and that the value of adding a gentle mental note is very powerful, so we definitely encourage the practice, if it's helpful. S- Sometimes because the tradition has been so um, focused on that there's like an emphasis on like mental noting every single moment of in such minuscule detail. Sometimes the pressure of that can be a lot over time, and people feel like you just get kind of tight, and uptight about your practice. So it's why we tend to emphasize the more just like feeling into and the knowing of what's happening. And the difference between knowing and noting is like subtle, So it's like knowing of these phenomena. It's maybe a little more like watercolory, but the mental noting is like more precise and certainly, encouraged. I don't know, Graham, does that get towards your sort of question a little bit?
Well, there are a couple of other people with hands up, so I think I should defer to them, and I'll, I'll. One might hope that the mind might digest some of what you've said. Come back another time.
Sure. I don't know, Michelle, do you want to add anything? Oh, you're muted, Michelle, there.
Well, I think sometimes there are teachings around this that are, um, for some people, interesting, and for some people, overwhelming. So that, but I think it's important to mention. I think I'll stand up for. It's said that for a moment of chitta, for a moment of consciousness to happen, you need three things. So that when I was introduced to that, it was Sayadaw U Pandita described striker, receptor, ignition. So that if you have a matchbox and you have the matches, right, the flint on it, and then you strike the tip of the match on it, and you get ignition. So receptor, it's like the place where the flint is actually there. That receptor is like the ear door or the eye door or the nose door, right? The mouth, the tongue, the mind is a door, right? So that the body door. You have to have these three things. A striker would be, say it's with hearing, it would be a sound. Say the sound of the wind is very strong here right now, so say it's the wind. So that's striker, and then the ear door is receptor, and then the knowing of that, the mind knowing it, is how the chitta happens. With all six sense doors, there has to be a striker, receptor, ignition, and it's kind of interesting to look at all of us individually and to see that I think that we all have a natural inclination toward one of those, like striker, receptor, ignition. And what I appreciated about Upandita long term. Short term, it was very hard, but long term is that he was trying to get you to have a mastery with all of it, so that, and he tended to go toward the objects of the attention. You know, the striker. He tended to emphasize that because it's usually the least refined. So it's much easier for us to be mindful of something that's not as refined and to notice it appear and disappear and to understand anicca, dukkha, anatta through that kind of training. And that what I was noticing him notice more than I had noticed it, but I couldn't have put it into words. But I noticed that a lot of modern educated people tended to not want to be aware of the body and not be aware of sound in this way, in this particular way, not terms of yoga trying to stretch or control the body, but actually to be interested in the body as it is. The old guys, the old masters in Burma will usually start you on the body because actually it's the easiest and it's almost the least we're interested in. And we tend to want to jump to the mind and just be into this more refined place of knowing. And it's not that individuals have more of an inclination toward one or the other, but the idea is that you get to understand unpleasant, pleasant, neutral, the foundation of Vedana as of mindfulness as a place of training. You get a place of understanding the mind contents. And I wasn't sure if you were asking about knowing or the contents of mind. And so that's what Jesse filled that in. But it's all to say that what I've noticed now, I can say at this age that we can get attached to anything. So we can get attached to just being aware of knowing, or we can be attached to the body or hearing. And it's like what I appreciated, again, long-term about Upandita is that he kept trying to break my attachment to any of it. And in breaking the attachment to any of it, then you can really do sixth sense door moment-to-moment awareness, because you just let it rip. You let the moment-to-moment flow, and you're not attached to knowing or hearing or body sensations, because it's all moving so fast, you see? So that if you're attached to a particular way of perceiving reality, you're going to get stuck. Isn't that fun? Like, I find it's really fun when you start to get it, and then when you start to just see how we get attached to certain ways of being with how things are. It's great, but also it takes quite a lot of years of training to be able to even understand this, right? It takes a lot of years to really get a handle of any of it. Like, you're lucky if you're able to catch. I remember my first retreat, I could barely be aware of a breath, right? Like, it was like, and forget thinking, or, you just like are a step, like it says, what are they talking about, right? It's just so hard to just even, pay attention to eating. Are you kidding me? Like, that would be my break time, like, are you, just I remember pay attention in the shower. Are you kidding? Like, that would be like time out. Like, there would be so many times out, right? And so if somebody told me my first retreat that I was going to be paying attention to every moment as best I could of my life, like, I might have walked out. It just would have been overwhelming. So yeah, I'm not sure if this answers your question, Graham, but it's such a big field, knowing, because knowing includes every sense door.
It's cool for us because it's such a good way to start talking about the thing that's like so basic about this practice and so hard about this practice, and yet so fun, like so amazing. In fact, I'm gonna here in the chat, I'm just gonna put a link to this is like Mahasi Sayadaw's classic Vipassana instructions. And they're just the best. It's just like, it's so pure and it's so clean. And it's just like hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. And then he also explains like why you would do that. And because it sounds so crazy on one hand, but it is, you realize like the torrent of moments. A moment is so fleeting, and that all of these sense doors are just crashing down on the present moment and then disappearing. And then it's like, it's just this unbelievable torrent of experience that is so hard to have a peaceful heart with, to see clearly, right? That you and that the peace comes through training, through more seeing clearly, through more acknowledgement of what's really happening, and seeing how fast it's all moving, and how subtle it is, and how hard it is for the heart to bear all of the pleasant and all of the unpleasant and all the changingness of it. And it's so beautiful to have these sort of training methods, to be able to feel like there's hope, there's that possibility that the mind can be free with all of this, right? That it doesn't need to just be controlling everything in order to be at peace with it and understand and have this freedom of kindness and generosity and patience, no matter what's happening, it manifests in very important, meaningful ways. So thanks for asking, Drew. Yeah. Anne.
Hi, Anne.
Hi. Thank you. I find myself having no problem, I don't say no problem, but it's much easier to inspect uncomfortable feelings than comfortable. So, because I know that the more I inspect the uncomfortable, they will move more towards neutral. But then when I'm like, oh, I'm happy. Oh, I'm feeling joy. And then I'm like, cool, I just want to stay in this because it's pleasant. So I'm wondering if you have guidance for how do you inspect the pleasant feelings or even the lack of pain? Like if you're sitting and you have pain, it's like, okay, I'll inspect that pain, or I'll ignore that pain and it will neutralize. But when it's the joy and the pleasant, I'm kind of like, well, that's great. Let's just leave that alone.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say a little. I don't know, Michelle, you can say more. I mean, it's a great question, and I think the fact that you're asking it means it's like you're already on to it, that in some ways it's just you trust that there's a progression in our practice, not a progression that's like always so straightforward, but like there's a change. Our practice matures, it develops, it changes, and you start to get a sense like you're describing of like, oh, I'm not really interested in this, I just want to enjoy it. And that's not something to give yourself a hard time about, right? Because it's of course, and the fact that you notice that is very powerful, and so there is a sense of, like, of course, over time, that where do we find the ability to actually be interested in pleasant experience? Where do we interested in neutral experience at the same degree? And then what you start to see that maybe your interest in unpleasant experience isn't always genuine interest, right? It is a little bit of the sense of, well, if I'm paying attention to it, I'm going to kind of neutralize the painfulness of it, right? I'm going to kind of pull the thorn out in this way. And not that there isn't something true, right? A sort of the mental thorn can get pulled out, but also there's a way in which it's like, are we bringing mindfulness so that it makes something less painful, and that we're therefore attached to the outcome of mindfulness, right? That we're it's not genuine interest in this experience itself. And so that that of course is our practice, is this refinement of motivation, over time, that it's like, well, what we think of as attention has all of these qualities to it that are very subtle, of like, well, what really is motivating the attention? And is the attention attention? Is it tight? Is it relaxed? Is it gentle? Is it, is it moved really close in? Is it sort of pulled far back? You start to get a sense that there's a lot of like, it's like you enter the cockpit of a plane. You're like, wow, this is, it's not just like a steering wheel, right? There's like a lot of levers to be aware of. And so it's beautiful, right? And then there's a level of complexity there. And I think I'll just say that what you're at is like so meaningful. It's like, okay, what does it look like to be interested in pleasant experience, right? In the same way that you are an unpleasant experience. What is it, does it do we get a little disenchanted with it, right? Are we willing to have a sense of wanting to be free enough that we're not just enchanted with these experiences that aren't going to last? We know they're not going to last. But at the same time, you don't want to take away the goodness of it. There's a lot of place where it's like the beautiful experiences of meditation that we might have are meant to be beautiful. They're meant to be motivating and inspiring. And yet, as Michelle was saying, like you can get attached to anything, And so there is that place of like the maturing of the motivation, the purification of that. Where is there genuine interest in watching the heart get hooked, and knowing that actually watching it doesn't mean you have to let go of the pleasant either. It's like, or it doesn't mean that the pleasant necessarily goes away. Just like the unpleasant doesn't necessarily go away when you observe it. The pleasant might not either, but it might. And I'll maybe just say that, I think many people sort of also have a hard time with eventually is neutral experience, is realizing that like neutral is often the hardest thing to be with after a while. It's like, because there isn't a big sense of identification there, the sense of meanness. Sometimes it's like it feels like an abyss. It feels like we lose ourselves in it. And this hilarious reality that a lot of people realize like they would rather have unpleasant, painful experiences happening than have to be in the sort of ocean of neutral. Because it's like you feel like at least there's this like aversion that's like me against this thing, and having to let go of that into sort of like a kind of more nebulous space can be very scary. And so yeah, it's a great question. And there's nothing to do except for just see what it's like to start to bring in a little bit of more investigation into those moments. And you don't have to doesn't have to feel like you're wrenching the pleasant away from yourself. It's like, it's part of the deeper freedom, that we have access to. Oh. Michelle, yeah.
Yeah. I think that Jesse might have said this. I'm just saying it in a different way, maybe a little bit, but I do think that unpleasant feeling has more of a call to investigate it because it's so unpleasant. I don't know how to say it. Like it's like there is that sense in the Visuddhimagga that they say aversion types can develop wisdom the quickest because they're so motivated, right? Like you're noticing pain all the time, pleasant, unpleasant, and there really is no way out but through that aversion tendency. And but even with that, I think with all of us, there's a tendency to want to get to the unpleasant and pleasant rather than to the enjoyment and the aversion. So what's hard to even talk about it is really how do we get interested in investigating enjoyment? And it's really hard because you're that sense of oneness with the pleasant object, you really don't want to be bothered with investigation. And I had an experience with a feral cat. There's 2 of the 3 feral cats that like catnip, and they didn't seem to be going into the fresh catnip in the pot, although they get in it. But I dried some catnip, and Jesse found it and decided to put some out for the one of, well, both of them. But the mother cat had it on her scratching board. This is really funny. So like, well, I can't remember what I was doing, but I think it had spilled out all over the place, and I went to move the dried catnip off like the floor, and she thought I was taking it away from her. And she's never scratched me before. She's never done this, and she loves this catnip so much. I love describing these kind of things because it's so much easier than with us humans. She just like wanted it so bad. She grabbed onto me, and she didn't mean to. She even pulled off when she saw that she had scratched me a bit. But there was that sense of like, my catnip, right? Like, no, mine. It was just so pure enjoyment that she didn't want me to bother her with. And the cats are very possessive. They're very possessive of their catnip. It becomes very clear that they're identified. And I think that we don't really want to see that about ourselves. I don't think we want to just see that like, oh, it's like, what if it's ice cream or whatever? It's like you just grab onto it, but with unpleasant, you're not grabbing onto it, right? So like you have a little bit more space to want to just zero in on it. Of course, we're trying to usually get rid of it, right? Or pay attention to it so we can manipulate it. But the enjoyment again will require from you a little bit of like. As Jesse said, but it's like, how do we want to really get free? And it's like, can we investigate getting hooked? Like how, and what it feels like to unhook. That's the big thing. It's like, what does it feel like to unhook from something pleasant?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I did actually, when Jesse was talking, I kind of identified more with the neutral. So I think that if I think about either of them on the way to neutral, then maybe it's a little different. Because you can also get hooked on the negative too, which is,
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But I think if I visualize the.
And some people get hooked on the neutral. I mean, there is this way we're all kind of constructed sort of different, right? Where it's like the quantum, like the no drama, just like, yeah, we're all different. I think just what Michelle said at the end is like, we're so important. It's like, we're so used to the flavor of the pleasure of the pleasant feeling of pleasant experience, right? Just like getting satisfaction and enjoyment, right? That is clearly like, we know what that feels like, we know it feels good, and we want more of it. We also know, kind of as you're describing, the pleasant experience of when something unpleasant fades away, the relief of that, right? That there's like, oh, that sort of sense of relief of the heart is a flavor that we understand, and that we like, and therefore will continue to seek. The flavor of unhooking from that dynamic is not something we are as well trained in. We don't necessarily have a taste for it in the same way. And so it takes a while to trust that is actually like a deeper pleasure, a deeper satisfaction of the letting go of the need to be satisfied through that which is never ultimately satisfying, right? And so it's like it's like the flavor of liberation, the flavor of peace is very different. It isn't satisfying in the same way to like a self, to a me, in the way that we're used to experiencing satisfaction, but it is something we develop in different ways over time. And that sometimes you find that it's through more neutral or through more pleasant or unpleasant, whatever it might be. But getting a taste for the unhooking and the relief of the mind from that, of not needing things to be one way or the other, is really that deeper flavor of equanimity and of liberation that this practice leads toward. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Samantha.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. I I you guys answered a little bit my question already. Thank you. Um, I think it's about consciousness. Um, again, not quite sure how to word it. But I've been sitting a lot, and when it gets really quiet, it gets more quiet, and the experience gets really subtle and thin. Um, it feels like so big and so thin and so light and so fast. Um, and it's not neither bad or good. I think it's more good than bad. It could be neutral, as you're all talking about. Um, but it's, I guess my question is, how thin does it get? How big does it get? Um, because I'm not quite sure how to hold it all together. It's like there's no glue holding it all together. And when it gets like that deep, and I'm just grateful for the alarm, on my phone to go off so I can come back. But in the next sitting, it may or may not happen again. I don't know. But it does come back often, which is really nice for me because that's kind of different. So there's less fear. So I like not having fear. When I'm done and I reflect on it, it's really nice. And in the moment, it's more like I'm not quite sure where to stand when there's nothing to stand on besides just that everything's kind of equal. Is that making any sense? Like I said, I'm not quite sure how to put it into words. Besides, how thin does it get?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, of course, you've been really sitting a lot, and sitting a lot of self retreats over the last year. And, so you're sort of like moving into these quieter times and back into the world and, kind of, so it for sure makes sense. And I love the description of like how it's thinner and bigger, and like there's something kind of paradoxical in that sounding, but it's like, yeah, right. There's like a lot of space, and that's like the magnitude of that is like so vast. And then phenomenon itself can be pretty ethereal, no matter which part of it in the body, the mind. So I think, I'm sure we'll both have things to say. What I think is most important around like these spaces, when you're when you're sort of like getting that quiet and things are that refined and so unfamiliar uh in various ways, but let's say particularly in terms of like the gluedness. I mean, just it's also good like when the alarm rings and then you go back and it's like just to knowing it's like, oh, the glue comes back, right? Suddenly it's like, okay, there's me and there's like the sort of normal version of ourselves. um so this going, it's like remembering that that doesn't mean you're losing access to this is a big part of the faith that builds and the ease that builds. Like it's just exactly what you described. It's like you go in and the mindfulness is strong enough, the faith is strong enough, the equanimity, all these things are strong enough so that you're basically, you go back to the edge of what the mind feels safe feeling, right? The version of reality that the mind feels safe experiencing, right, and being clear. And so that's like, it's just to say this is one version of reality, and so is the version of, you know, you drinking a cup of coffee and reading the paper or whatever, right? It's like, so this sense of understanding that you also get to that boundary of like, and there's something unsettling, right? There's something sort of maybe nervous or scary or confusing just about like, well, when everything is that sort of spacious and things are that thin, what is the solid? What is there to hold on to, right? And the big part of that of the Dhamma is like, in fact, right, there is nothing to hold on to. And that you are like, we're hold on to wherever we can. And there's still this, okay, me, I'm gonna conjure me out of the thinnest thing, right? And it's like, you have to be able to see some humor in that, or like how amazing this ability to contract. And it's like, and that's fine, and you don't fight it. You watch the sense of meanness arise out of like the thinnest almost nothingness, right? There's still this, what can we make solid out of this? And you don't fight it, you don't try to talk yourself out of it. You notice the tension and you come back like you do to something more familiar and more safe. It's like, you cannot force your mind to be okay with the like absolute undependability of all phenomena. You cannot push it. And that's what's so great about what you're describing. It's just like, we think we want to be free, we think we want to be, but it's like, when we get to how fluid everything really is and how insubstantial things are, you understand why the mind does not want to be free. The mind wants things to be solid. The mind wants things to be under control. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's like, of course. And so that you don't fight the mind that's contracting against this or trying to find something to hold on to. You let it do it. And that's the sense of your mind has to trust you that you're going to care for it. And you're not just throwing it over the edge, right into the abyss. It's like, oh yeah, there's this hardship, right, of at the core of existence. And you're just respecting that sort of basic primal fear of that, and you honor that and you take care of it, and you bring it back into more familiar terrain, right, as like stabilizing and secure. So I just feel like you're doing everything right, and you don't need to force it anymore. You take breaks, because you're on retreat right now. It's like, don't overdo it. You don't need to push this. It's like, go for a walk, take a rest, read. It's like, you can let the mind get very solid again. No big deal. And you're not losing access to that when you drop in. Like, that's so cool that you're describing that. It's like, you go back to sit and it's like, whoop, there you are again, eventually, and maybe not every sitting of the day, but it's like, it's there. And so it's like, actually, the more you allow your system to get solid and your meanness to be solid, and you don't think that yourself doesn't think you're trying to rip that away, the more what continues to happen will just keep happening. It's the more trust in the truth that you're seeing.
Thank you, Jesse.
I think I would only add the word ungraspable. Like, you're diving into ungraspability. And then everything that Jesse's describing happens. And you will feel overly obliterated by it if you don't take breaks, like Jesse is saying. You'll get afraid of it and feel obliterated rather than understand it. So it's like learning how to navigate mindfulness of an ungraspability. Often the mindfulness will feel less sharp and less clear because it starts to become more like a blur sometimes. And these places can be very difficult to learn how to navigate. It's like, this is the joy of exploration, but you see how few people really want to explore that level of reality. So it takes that gentle pacing. People can get attached to ungraspability, and then the little me's going to put up too big a fight at some point if we get attached to it. So it's just all learning how to navigate. Lao Tzu said, from wonder into wonder, existence opens. And I think it's just you're tasting the joys and sorrows of exploration itself. Another way that's said is no part left out. You're exploring all these things, no part left out. Freedom is being free with anything that can appear in the universe.
Yeah, that is very nice to see something really painful and something very mundane. If I was to judge it from a different perspective, side to side, and it's like the same. That's pretty trippy.
Right, and to have a impartiality with mundane and ungraspability, to have an impartiality with every experience, that's freedom.
And it's part of that. I mean, in some ways, it goes back to that initial question around noting. It's like that's part of why the noting has that flavor of impartiality. It's just like noting, oh, wanting, pressure, tension, thinking, like, and you just, like they say, you note until there's nothing left to note.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sounds great. Yeah. No pressure.
I'd like to say something about what you said, Jesse, which is so important, which is it's like any place that we are attached to not experience or experiencing, it's gonna, as you practice more, it's gonna get more predominant in terms of its appearing, because it still has power. So like that noting, like thinking, metta, peace, rage, terror, right? Pure rage, terror. You see that? Do you see, like, you can hear in the way that we make a note, or the way we notice something, dreaming, sleepy, restless, like, or is it restless? Oh no, not aversion again. Oh, I'm not going to deal with this rage, or that just that level to which it really is just that, what Jesse just said, but I'm adding in things that we don't like, right? And we can have a lot of aversion to thinking itself. I mean, we can, but we can, it's just like, it's learning that you're not getting away with anything here. You're not getting rid of anything to be free. You're learning how to deal with rage, or you're learning how to deal with peace, and that it's impermanent. You're learning how to deal with whatever, that's the ticket. And that's why it's hard. Because we have an idea, whether it's conscious or unconscious, about what freedom really looks like. And it usually means not having experiences that we don't want. And that's hard. But when you start tasting it, the truth feels so much more of a relief than trying to manipulate it at all, you know.
Nevertheless, we hope none of you have any experiences you don't want over the next week, and only experiences you want. We'll see how that goes next Sunday. Take care, everyone. Really wonderful to be with you.